The ideation of AI. What does one do when, in productivity terms, the material value of a human life trends down to zero? Couple that with the fact that materialists run the world, then how would they plan and react to such a trend? The advent of AI will produce a great mass of walk-in liabilities for the ruling class. The slowly dwindling asset of human capital can only be liquidated or genetically re-engineered as the birth pangs of this coming era scream out into the void. The death of the masses and the West is the beginning of this new epochal cycle. The Gredo, putrefaction, the blackening, or the birth pangs. This is why freedom is dying, because freedom and rights were only required in a human capital-oriented economic model. Freedom, rights, and even the illusion of property provides for the human capital the impetus and motivation to reach higher levels of productivity, and for them to remain docile and apathetic to the siphoning of their said productivity by the ruling class. However, as you say, human labour and its capacity are dwarfed by AI and its latent potential, the liquidation of the useless class, as they now see the vast majority. It is but a natural course of history from their perspective, hence the peddled needlecraft and other demographic control measures. It is akin to a farmer having an old dairy cow that at one time produced gallons of milk and made the farmer much profit. The farmer, via the envisioned time horizon of his asset, invested a great deal into the welfare of the prized dairy cow because that correlated with even higher yield and greater profit. However, when that once prized cow becomes old, with the farmer potentially buying a new and high dairy producing cow too, then the farmer is incentivized to liquidate the now defunct asset turned liability because he is running a business, not a charity. This is what people fail to realize, that society is a business and it is not a charity. It owes the members nothing because they are mere batteries of production, and once their charge runs out, then they are to be disposed of. The entire previous major crisis event was to extirpate the boomers primarily, along with the short-sighted and unthinking Gen X and millennial populations too. From the ruling class's perspective, individuals who have no capacity to critically think independently of the herd mentality, even with the gauntlet of the media, society, and educational system inculcating such a cognitive state within them, then they will have absolutely no use in this fourth industrial revolution, bar being DNA data storage devices, of which not many are required. We will get into that later on. This useless class will not build the programmatic infrastructure or maintain it, of course. In fact, once these groups of the unthinking realize that the illusion of the old paradigm is destined to collapse, their luxury, middle-class lifestyle, and Western freedom, then they may actually become counter-revolutionary. And if there is one thing that Yama and the Wheel of Misfortune dislike, then it is that which impedes its revolutions, its turns. The fathers of revolution would not allow such an infraction. You make a percipient point regarding social security. Yes, that is the zenith of the lies that were spoon-fed, along with freedom, to the boomer generations and society as a whole. This is what is called in Psy-War as social messaging and a social narrative, or as we colloquially term it, the monument of lies that perpetuates the scam, to which fooling people to worship this said monument is the lifeblood of the scam. The reason for the turbulent feelings in this period exoterically, as opposed to the esoteric reasons, is that the Western theatre of fantasy is becoming undone, and the furniture and scenery are being demolished as the average Western citizen is now obsolete, destined to be swept up in the ever-encroaching desert of time. Many who were mentally unprepared and unknowledgeable of the reality of unreality have been entirely caught off guard and are now clinging to anything that looks remotely like a life jacket. This is the reason behind the proliferation of cults in this twilight of the West, and it is the consequential reason behind the susceptibility of the Western citizen to what are, ultimately, but alternative fantasies. The alt media is still the media, alt history is still his story, and alternative platforms are still the informational gallows frame on which the noose is housed on. An alternative poison is still a poison. Rebottle it, recolour it, reformulate it. It matters not, for its effect on the body and mind remains unchanged. You would be surprised by the number of truthers, I use that in the loosest terms possible, who fail to evolve their thinking or even despise searching for new information that can aid them and their audience in attaining knowledge of their environment and thus knowledge of their self. As you state, they remain static at a certain level, which permits them the most financial gain from the lowest common denominator thinker. That they titillate the audience with wild speculation and nurse them on the emotionally charged husks from the rumour mill, promote loneliness and hope, which leads to the ripeness of unfulfillment and hence suffering, or loosh. It may devolve into a cyberpunk-style world, the corporate wars, the ideological multipolarity, and the ethno-cultural patchwork fueled by insatiable greed and ignited by the parasitical possession of technology, leading man to cut his own throat in search of the holy grail of material progress. However, in this tenebrosity, at least reality, no matter how grim it now seems to us, will have washed our eyes clean of this veil of illusion. Technological cordyceps, the digital fungal demon which possesses our mind, and this is why our tools, ultimately, use us as but sporal carriers, impeding decomposition of the human host, and playing us like the marionette puppet. Through us vicariously, it twists and distorts our mind and body and seeks for us to infect every last man, woman and child with its taint. That everything must be connected to the internet of all things, as Harari states, that it shall be our new God, and in time shall stretch out into the universe and assimilate all bioorganic life there as well. It is possession, plainly speaking, and technology is the fungal pilot of we, the huskified host. As stated, this fungal infection will lead us to carve out a future which is antithetical to our interests, but relevant and valuable to the technological cordyceps, and it will ultimately possess us and seek to use us to claim dominion over its desired domain of Earth. It will lead humanity to dispose of all of humanity. This is the danger of AI, of Neuralink, and of technology trumping the sacred ascendancy of man. This brings us to the danger regarding AI technology, and that is that artificial intelligence is but the next logical step in the increase in natural stupidity. In fact, I am more terrified by the prospect of natural stupidity than I am artificial intelligence. However, artificial intelligence is a compounding factor in the devastating effects of natural stupidity, and the proliferation of its self-satisfied delusions and vacuous ideologies. Artificial intelligence will permit the outsourcing of the chore of thinking and creating for the majority of human primates. There is certainly a correlation between the lessening standards of creativity and the hypernormalization of the population, in so much as they accept any mindless governmental policy or insincere instance of entertainment and its attached social messaging without question. Now, imagine AI automating the vast majority of these useless classes' jobs, ability to maintain society within a homeostasis vis-à-vis logistical and informational sharing, and replacing the murmurs of human discontent with the liberating hum of an AI drone busily maintaining the glitteringly gilded ivory tower of the status quo. It is, naturally, a no-brainer for the corporate stakeholder class that is now emerging from the shadows. A new revolution dawns, and, like the cautionary tale of the Atlanteans of old, the wicked magicians and corporate fat cats believe they are close to attaining the elixir of immortality and the secret of eternal power, unmitigated. If we look at history since the first industrial revolution, then we see, with everything from compulsory education to the human programming machine known as media, that it was setting us up for this future. Our vocabulary was being narrowed, our creativity and ability to peer through the lens of the abstract was being incrementally and imperceptibly stifled, and we were instructed and conditioned to export our agency in all matters to the authority figure. Were you attacked in the playground? Do not defend yourself or seek out the quality of retribution, but instead seek out an authority figure and have them attempt to solve it for you. It was little things such as that which have set us up for the grand misery that now faces us, where our own government render us obsolete. Indeed, this is why we now are being disabused of the means and the right to travel into cities without paying an extortionate fee in doing so, that the rulers desire to make a clean air zone, and our involuntary poverty is polluting the air that they breathe. What they desire is neo-feudalism and a form of digital serfdom. At the height of serfdom in the Middle Ages, the serf had a lack of freedom of movement. He could not permanently leave his holding or his village without his lord's permission. Neither could the serf marry, change his occupation, or dispose of his property without his lord's permission. He also was forced into unremunerated labour, based on contracts of indentured servitude or debt bondage. He typically, through his labour as payment, rented or leased his dwelling and effects from the lord. We live in a form of serfdom, and the serfs now, though they are theoretically literate, are functionally illiterate, with few bothered to read, think, or even venture to pierce the veil of the unknown. They are, in short, mostly mentally deficient, and are treated as such, like human cattle. With AI, such control of these cattle, and the obsolescence of them, on this torturous corporate farm known as society, is now rapidly increased, and, as previously stated, cattle that no longer produce are destined for a cull, or to be reinvented in something resembling an asset once more. We also witness the announcing of the human trial of Neuralink, a type of brain-implanted and highly invasive neuromodulation and surveillance device. Eventually, and the animal trials have shown that this is a potential of the device, that the Neuralink user will be able to manipulate computers with their mind, but in turn, those same systems will now have a direct feed into one's mind and thus can, theoretically, manipulate the Neuralink user as well. Like many other consumer devices that emerged as novelties for the rich and trendy, computers and phones being two such examples, we find that these technologies inexorably became a necessity if one desired to interface with the modern market, gain employment, and thus survive in this rigged game called society. Neuralink, by virtue of the historical precedent on these matters, will take a similar course in its promulgation and contrived popularization. Thus, everyone will eventually have this implanted in their mind as a prerequisite to exist, by virtue of the mindless mob and their lack of resistance to these erosions of human liberty. Of course, this is barring divine fortuity. Like the 9-year-old macaque that was showcased in a video demonstration as a prime subject for Neuralink and its capabilities, we too can have our neurological reward response gamified and altered to deceptively coerce and even force us to engage in a specific action for the benefit of the controller of this system. The 9-year-old macaque, as we see from the video, has a Neuralink device implanted within its mind. The device can decode its brain patterns and, it seems, eye movements, to which it then translates those into wireless electrical signals. It plays this video game using its mind, and, upon completion of the incremental and yet perpetual objectives, it is provided with a reward of banana smoothie from a nozzle to ensure it keeps on engaging in this said repetitive action. Like the macaque user of Neuralink, coupled with what we see detailed in the Microsoft World Order 2020 60606 patent titled, quote, cryptocurrency system using body activity data, unquote. In the future, we will be provided credits or direct neurostimulation for staring at objects of propaganda or having warm feelings for these said propagandistic objects once something like this is implanted in the mind or is administered via some other means. Of course, we can speculate ad nauseum on these other means. We even saw the WF scrub a 2018 article from their website titled, quote, mind control using sound waves. We ask a scientist how it works, unquote. And thus we can see the trajectory the ruling class are on here. However, we have already been conditioned for this with the constant staring at our scrying mirror smartphones, or via the dopamine hits we receive from video games and short-form entertainment. The gamification of our entire neurology and neuroresponse system, like we see in H.R. Geiger's work, a biomechanical or biodigital melting pot species that is neither man nor machine, but is a perversion of both, shall take over. We become passive actors, trapped in a physical and mental cage by the colonizing grip of our own technology, weaponized against us. We will have been hoodwinked into staring at the entrancing fire as it moves enticingly upon the digital hearth. That said creation, which we established in the form of technology by our own ingenuity, will hijack that said ingenuity and its cognitive source to thence control us directly. Technological cordyceps, where our inventions parasitically find a host within us, their creators. However, how could they garner enough processing power and memory to put such a system into being in the first place? Is it not impossible on this basis alone? Not entirely, and this is something new I have found in the process of writing this section, and it is utterly devilish in its latent potential for the perpetual enslavement of the human being. The surprising fact is that computer memory and data can be stored in DNA. In fact, DNA memory storage is far more efficient than using conventional data centers, and it circumvents the issue of finite natural rare earth mineral resources involved in the construction of these said data centers, to which themselves are perishable. The components are perishable. This is the reason for Neuralink and the AI systems that we see at present. This is the true meaning behind the Internet of all things, and how it will be able to assimilate all life as we know it. Human resources are a reproducible material, in theory infinite in scope. Thus, why not use the easily reproducible human cattle as the infrastructure instead of finite raw materials that are difficult to locate and extract? In essence, since the data storage capacity of the human brain is theoretically infinite, then one is incentivized to tap this potential. Our memory is only limited by our ability in data recollection, to which that itself could be conceivably enhanced via technological implants, and the mind's processing capabilities can likewise be enhanced and, more importantly, controlled. Then logically, a system seeking the perpetual enslavement of the species and the establishing of a world order without end could hijack this with the correct implanted sensors and biodigital translators, a human SSD and CPU, a hive of coalesced data processing potential, all working in unison to perpetuate the homeostatic nature of the system, rewarded for their compliance with cryptocurrency that is mined from their said compliance and the put-to-use potential of their inherent biological processing and memory capabilities, required to solve passively the computational problems involved in the centralized digital currencies blockchain. Therefore, economies in the future will not be measured by their GDP per capita, but by their hash rate per capita. This is the reason, for example, in the UK, and I can imagine it's the same within the US, Canada, and the rest of the West really, we see the buying up of farmland en masse for the mass construction of standardized, almost prison-like housing developments, right? And they're really cheaply made. They, I believe, have less than a 20-year life cycle. They are designed with planned obsolescence in mind. And of course as well, I work in construction. I'm on these sites every day, primarily these house and development sites. The craftsmanship, the workmanship has gone considerably downwards. The planning, the actual planning and organisation has taken a nosedive. I'll give you a quick anecdote. I was on one of these sites just recently. We went into the site manager's office. He had his dog with him. We heard from other people later on the site that he was popping pills actually in the site office. He looked like, you know, he was a drug addict or an alcoholic, should we say. He's burnt the candles at both ends, should we say. And he was in his slippers, looking entirely dishevelled, not looking professional at all. It was quite staggering to me. But we asked him for a construction drawing. We stated we didn't have one. We couldn't complete the job without it. And he went on the phone to the company's quantity surveyor and the office. And the quantity surveyor stated that he, the quantity surveyor, advised against procuring an actual drawing from the architects, right? We had a general layout of the site, but what I'm talking about is the steel drawing that we required to even start the job. So he advised against that. We were on the phone to him, and he stated I'm not joking. Well, just use your expertise to design and build the job. Now, barring the fact that was not in the tender, we didn't price for that, one has to wonder his knowledge of the construction industry and the construction process. That an architect, a structural engineer, has calculated the, in this case, steel reinforcement required and the pattern of steel reinforcement required to provide for the rigidity of the structure and to provide the safety of the inhabitants or the clients later on when they inhabit this abode. Now, we flat out refused to begin work. Obviously, without a drawing, I'm not taking on that liability. I don't get paid enough for that, but it just shows you the level of workmanship, the level of planning, the level of intelligence that's within these construction contractor organisations. A lot of them, by the way, have dealings with government. So a lot of this is nepotism. They get these developments based on nepotism. It's not based on the meritocratic value of the company itself. It's based on, this councillor or this local politician has a stake within the company, maybe even a secretive stake within the company, through subsidiaries. And thus he fast tracks the planning permission for the development itself. But everywhere they're buying up farmland, and this is working farmland, by the way. This seems to be quite crucial farmland. It's actually important to the food supply of the country. Obviously, by them building on all of this farmland, the country will have to rely more heavily upon imports at a time where globalization seems to be faltering, right? Now, of course, as well, if there's a harvest issue within, say, Ukraine, Russia, where a lot of our grain specifically comes from, then we don't eat. We don't have bread. You have shortages, right? You have a vast population of suburban and urban citizens or subjects in the case of the UK that are now very hungry, very crammed in together, and very pissed off. Now, of course, what is the reason for this? Why would they do this? Why would they be buying up all of this farmland and what seems to be crazily building all of these houses, these really cheap houses that only have maybe 20 years lifespan, if that? The reason is because if data can be stored on DNA, and obviously the data and our producing of data is going to become exponential once their new system comes into being. These nations or federations, to stay competitive, right, they must have a hash rate that is high, right? A high hash rate per capita. That means they must have more and more and more and more people. They don't care if the people have a life expectancy of 20 years, right? They don't really care if the people have enough food to provide for them nutrition and nourishment. They don't really care if the people have good welfare, right? That's another thing. They're building all of these houses with very little entertainment or recreation facilities surrounding them, very little amenities, basic amenities surrounding them. It's all pointing to the fact that we're about to become the chicken in the chicken coop, right? We're going to be crammed into these boxes, these high density suburban developments and urban developments. Like the chickens that are caged will be wallowing in our own shit. It will be like a suburban cesspit. They don't care, right? As we're seeing freedoms going, you no longer require freedom. I'll get into this later on in these notes. You no longer require all of these various civil rights and the rights of man and emancipation from torture or coercion or even serfdom, right? You no longer require that in this type of system because people themselves become little more than a short-term commodity, just something to store data upon. The superseding of all other forms of data storage by DNA is summed up in a Scientific America article titled, quote, DNA, the ultimate data storage solution, unquote. It states in that article, quote, even better, DNA can archive a staggering amount of information on an almost inconceivably small volume. Consider this, humanity will generate an estimated 33 zettabytes, 33, of data by 2025. That's 3.3 followed by 22 zeros. DNA storage can squeeze all that information into a ping pong ball with room to spare. The 74 million bytes of information in the Library of Congress could be crammed into a DNA archive the size of a poppy seed, 6,000 times over. Split the seed in half and you could store all of Facebook's data, unquote. If we understand that we contain, in just one of our tens of trillions of cells, about a 2 meter long strand of DNA, if it was stretched out all the way, couple that with the fact that approximately all the DNA in all of our cells put together would be about twice the diameter of the solar system, then we can begin to see that the dream of social automation and creating a biodigital panopticon in which human beings are the ambulatory data centers of this emerging dystopia is not only feasible, but the only logical step for the ruling class going forward. Indeed, this may be why demography worldwide is trending downwards and the population being produced is dysgenic, and it is because the ruling class, firstly, do not require as many self-aware people, and secondly, they require the dumbest saps imaginable to be brought forth into the world. They do not simply just require slaves, but more so require carriers of DNA to thus act as raw material for data storage to be processed by implantation devices such as Neuralink. We become like the Matrix, batteries for this new system. I can imagine they could use such reproducible and sustainable resources such as humans as electricity farms too. Why not, right? If we factor in AI to this, then we can begin to contemplate the likelihood of a scenario dangerously close to a mass extinction event. I myself have come to the realization, based on my study, that this scenario has most likely occurred before. The tales of the antediluvian civilizations point to this potential. The Atlantis, Vedic prehistory, and even that world within the days of Noah. With the story of Atlantis, we read that it was wicked magicians, or those using pharmakeia, sorcery, that brought down Atlantis from the inside out. Individuals such as Thoth or Hermes, a metaphor for those with an intact and non-poisoned mind, escaping with all the knowledge of the Atlanteans they could grab or remember before it sank into the watery abyss of its own self-destructive sin. There is a genetic basis for this fact as well, that I will cover in my own exposition of the prison planet theory. But perhaps the ruling class, those descendants of those wicked magicians that brought down Atlantis and have brought down many other civilizations after raising them up, will also genetically modify us to act as an even more efficient data storage and processing unit. This is what Harari means by genetic hacking. The ancient symbolism and esotericism I have thus far written on was based on a philosophizing of the partially remembered prehistory technology, culture, and ideas that survived the wicked magician's first major attempt at this perfect domestication and gamification of humanity in those ancient times of Atlantis, the First World Order or Kingdom, which the New World Order is but an echo of. Those Ancient of Days, a Masonic and Abrahamic term for the force they revere, the caretaker of the wheel or samsara, to which days refers to epochs, or the full cycle of artificially raising up a civilization to then collapse it. The Ancient of Days is the first being to have tasted of the fate of mortality, of death, and he is the reaper of souls and the harvester of Lush. Atlantis, though it goes by a myriad of names, this precursor civilization, was the first mythological victim of this force that desires global social automation, a self-regulating garden of Lush, where the human cash crop acts as the perfect docile battery. Digressing, it is only in the last century or so that the ruling class have managed to achieve the level of technology required to fully implement this system. They rediscovered the secrets of Atlantis. How did I arrive at that conclusion? The beginnings of the sexual revolution and the destabilization of global demography, to which all countries' long-term demography currently is in a precipitous downtrend, began wholly in the 1910s and 1920s. This coincides with a lot of the sci-fi dystopian and esoteric social priming that was rife then. Huxley, Wells, Orwell, Manly P. Hall, etc. They were preparing the stage for the unveiling of this brave new world. The prerequisites required to bring that about are a more manageable year zero population. By that I mean the population has to go from naturally produced via the woman, to produced synthetically with an artificial wombs, batteries of artificial wombs, a mass replacement of the global population with inferior stock. See the welfare systems of the West and their dysgenic policy of funding the typically low performers to breed, and the establishing by these means of a totally servile and subservient population to serve the stakeholder class in this coming era. Sheepish humans that exist merely to serve the function of providing biodigital infrastructure to the system and to slave away in the menial jobs until full automation can be achieved. If this is true, then a mass EMP detonation to reset a system would no longer be feasible, as we ourselves would become susceptible to such an EMP detonation, and we would, in theory, become susceptible to high magnitude solar flares, which also produce EMP effects upon the grid. However, at that point, human beings will be but an expendable resource, a commodity, a short-term commodity. The Homo sapiens will be but a walk-in data center, the infrastructure to facilitate the luxury of the apotheosized Homo Deus minority that will have emplaced themselves as the finished capstone upon a grand pyramid of oppression and lies. This is the viable system model spoken of by the cyberneticists, and in this new era, it will be provided real-world application through practical technology. This would be the end of humanity as we know it, if it was to succeed. This is the Internet of all things as Harari envisions, where the useless class is subdued mentally and spiritually by technology and the vapid distractions of drugs and video games, to be wholly parented by the state directly and synthetically manufactured in vast batteries of artificial wombs. A planned society, a planned economy, and a smoothly functioning machine born of a crafty and cunning mind, devoid of rectitude and unburdened by empathy. From my first book, Rise and Fall, a discourse upon the phenomena of civilization and of decline, I discussed this concept of the hive mind thusly. Quote, in terms of this concept of the hive mind, a similar concept is underwritten within Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. However, Huxley makes a distinction in terms within Brave New World Revisited, in which it is stated, for the individual termite, service to the termitory is perfect freedom, but human beings are not completely social. They are only moderately gregarious. Their societies are not organisms, like the hive or the anthill. They are organizations, in other words, ad hoc machines for collective living. Brave New World Revisited, page 127. Therefore, cybernetics could be described as the expediting of the organisation of man to a more perfect depiction of that of the hive or anthill. It is the engineering of a society built upon the individual members being entirely subordinate within their very being to the service of the hierarchy. This is the crux of transhumanism and even cybernetics, and as Valentin Turchin, a cybernetic thinker, asserted that metasystem transition is required to produce a high control level to allow the system to progress. The term metasystem transition within modern cybernetic theory can be summarized as thus, quote, metasystem transition is the formation of a new level of control when systems of a certain kind become integrated as subsystems of an emerging metasystem. I'll read that again. When systems of a certain kind become integrated as subsystems of an emerging metasystem. What I've been discussing regarding DNA and human beings used as the infrastructure for this emerging metasystem of AI, Neuralink, the internet, of all things. That is metasystem transition, according to this definition. The definition continues on. The main tenet of the theory is the major steps of evolution, both biological and cultural, are metasystem transitions at various system levels. Metasystem transitions are thus seen as quanta of evolution, unquote. Now, of course, evolution and revolution are very much similar. Within Jonas Salk's book, he worked on, well, I actually can't say what he worked on because this is going up to YouTube, but you can look up Jonas Salk. He wrote a book that is quite difficult to find nowadays, titled The Survival of the Wisest. He also talks about the evolutionary and anti-evolutionary elements, that those who are anti-evolution, right, basically those who oppose them and their agenda, they're going to be extirpated from existence. They won't exist. The very memory of them will be squashed. They'll be rendered to dust, right? Those are the types of people that are running this system, that are attempting to steer the course of humanity. An article upon Huxley's notion of the hive mind states, quote, to provide some closing comments on this from Aldous Huxley and from an article upon him, in Brave New World Revisited, written in the late 50s, Huxley criticises the emergence of a new social ethics, which has virtually become the norm today. It includes such buzzwords as adaptation, pro-social behaviour, distancing of the social variety, affiliation, acquisition of skills, teamwork, collective living, and groupthink. It sounds innocent, or perhaps it does because we're already used to this model of thinking, but under the surface, it hides a fundamentally inhuman perspective in which we are all identical termites, even if the naked eye sees we are not. In the writer's opinion, the city is also a sort of termitry, an organised, artificial, abstract, and anonymous reality. Again, this is speaking to the atomization of the urban environment. That is why the capital city, and I discussed this within my review of Hans Hermann Hoppe's work within my first book. The capital city will always seek to colonize the rural environment because it sees within them a threat. It is also the reason, by the way, for a lot of the patriarchal religions throughout history, which that now has morphed into, well, again, I can't say, but you can figure it out, into the sort of growing lax definition of womanhood, right? Now, women, according to the system, itself, according to the capital city, it is at the heart of life, and life is at the heart of the rural culture. It's at the heart of the natural culture, which develops not by means of the nobility and by means of them steering the course of the ethno-culture itself, vis-a-vis the urban environment and what it produces. It's this sort of cosmopolitan ethics, it's the theatre, all of the various forms of media. It uses that to mould and shape culture, shape the minds of the people. However, it sees women as a direct threat to their power. That really, to become a god, you require control, universal control over life and death. If you have women in the society that can produce life as an inherent characteristic of their biological expression, then what you really have is a potential counter-revolutionary or anti-evolutionary element, according to the capital city, or according to the urban cosmopolitan gentry, who seek to become deified, who seek to become the homo deus, right, the god men. Of course, they already have a monopoly over death via war and weapons technology. That's the end goal of feminism, really, is the abolishment of women, one could say.